So today I wanted to talk about something that I run into a lot almost every week when I'm out in the community or my staff is out in the community. And it's a common question. Someone is panicking, mom and dad's being discharged and their quality of life or their lifestyle's changing or they're slowly declining. What are things to consider? And there's a lot of options. As you know, this is America. We love options, and that's a good thing. But sometimes it can get very confusing. I want to talk about the top three options that I see most families consider. Maybe there's a fourth option, which is moving with the family member, but I won't talk too much about that one. All right. And everyone's situation is different. So I just want to anchor around some things to consider. So if you're taking notes, make a list, right? Make it a table and present it to your loved one, to your elderly father or mother who's considering options of how they want to live the rest of their life, right? How they want their quality of life. And I'll go back to that because I actually think that probably by far the most important thing, assuming, financially you can take on some of these options. So the first thing I get a lot of, and understandably, talk about financially, money. And that is a top thing. And I understand why. We're going to take any public assistance or government assistance off the table. So if you have Medi-Cal, like California, I'm going to take that off the table. Money wise, if you're talking about costs between home care, assisted living, and boarding homes, which are becoming very popular. I understand why, right? Because as the aging population becomes, you're going to see more and more boarding homes come online. And those are essentially usually a private residence that's converted. So you have anywhere from 3 to 6 residents that live there. And there's a caregiver. Usually they have shifts or they're living shifts taking care of someone of elderly or disability. So those are boarding homes. So those are usually private run. Now they're all regulated, but cost wise, home care ranges in the state of California, at least anywhere from $30 to $40 an hour, typically. Now I've seen lower. Typical range is anywhere from 30 to 40 plus dollars an hour. And it kind of depends on level of care, where you are in the area, in the state of California. Assisted living, well, home care varies hourly and depends on the level of care of the care plan. Assisted living is where you may have a ratio of a caregiver. It could be anywhere from 1 to 12. It could be 1 to 20, meaning one caregiver per how many residents. And that varies by state. I believe California, there are certain guidelines, but there's no strict guidelines around ratio. So if there's obviously a higher acuity or you're in memory care unit, depending on the level of care, it might be a 1 to 6 or a 1 to 10 ratio. Right? And if it's night, it's usually a higher ratio of, because most residents don't need as much help or they're sleeping through the night. It might be 1 to 20, 1 to 25. So that, in terms of cost can range anywhere from, depending on if it's a shared room, how the facilities are, food, the amenities, but it can range anywhere from, let's say, $4,000, $3,500 a month. And that includes room and board, and food, right? All the way to, $6,000, $7,000, even more, right? If you're going to a really, quite frankly, nice place. But that's all inclusive. So that's all inclusive. And I bring up the ratio because that's goes back to what everyone says is, well, how is my loved one being attended? And then boarding rooms, as I mentioned, the assisted is a lower ratio. It's, home care is usually a one-on-one. So you can imagine the level of care you're getting for a loved one versus a boarding room. I would say it's around the range of assisted living. It varies, might be more economical, but it's a wide range because they're usually privately run. So obviously if you get into a boarding room that it's a new build home, it's going to cost more. Or the ratio is very low. It's a 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 ratio residents to caregiver. Again, it's a more intimate set, right? Versus assisted living, you can have 100 residents as an example in the facility. And so that's cost. And you can imagine you're going through that cost and you're like, okay, there's trade-offs. I mentioned the ratio because that's the first thing people always ask me about. Just like anything else in life, you get what you pay for. Not all facilities are equal. And so do your research, and everyone, I'm sure you look online, there's going to be horror stories, just like anything else, right? And just keep that in mind. And so that goes to level of care you need, right? And so, of course, if you can afford it and the level of care your loved one is high acuity, home care is by far the best. But of course, there's a trade-off. There's going to be a cost associated with it. But I will say a lot of people falsely assume that, oh, my loved one or my dad needs 24/7 care, or they need 10 hours of care when I'm not around and I can only go at night or on weekends. I think oftentimes we will work with families and figure out what their budgets are. And at the end of the day, we're talking about more effectiveness of the caregiver when they're there and when you do and don't need it. As an example, we had a recent rehab client. And so, yes, they were more or less not ambulatory. They couldn't transfer themselves initially after surgery. So the first few weeks, we worked out a schedule where she only had a morning shift and a night shift, even though technically you can argue, yes, she needed 10 hours of care when she was awake, 12 hours of care. We worked out a schedule where it was only 6 to 7 hours a day. Right? And that helps cut down on cost. But again, it really depends on the acuity. So if your loved one is incontinent, as an example, then of course they need to be changed every 30 minutes, every hour if they need to go, right? And you don't want ulcers or bed sores or any infections or UTIs for them. In the home care situation, we have patients that get changed every 20, 30 minutes. It's really high acuity. If you're in assisted living, understand that they may or may not be sitting in their waste for an hour, 2 hours, maybe even 3 hours. Level of care cost, of course, that goes hand in hand. Everyone's budget different, right? In the real world, if everyone can afford it, and I know less than probably 1% of the population can actually afford 24/7 care in a home care situation, but just understand the trade-offs, right? Have that conversation with your loved one. Second is let's talk about lifestyle dependence. Most people want to be in the home. I want to be in my home. My mom has made very clear as an example that I want to pass in my home. You are to not send me to a facility if possible. So that is very important lifestyle. At the end of the day, imagine your loved one, they're going through this situation right now. They're losing their ability to be independent and how scary that is. And so you want to meet them where they're at is what I always coach people as best as possible while keeping them safe. And I know sometimes that can be hard because our loved ones at times can be very adamant, I'll say that in a very nice way, around what they want, whether or not it's safety or not, or they don't want a caregiver or a stranger coming in their home. And understand it's coming from a place of, from my experience, of just fear, right? Like a fear of the unknown, of a stranger and pride. So it's scary. It's scary. Consider that. What's important, which goes into lifestyle. I'll talk about social activity, interaction. The reality is a lot of seniors feel isolated and can be lonely at times. And so I would say an assisted living facility that has more of a structure around social activities, like activities every day, right? Like a cruise almost, in terms of there's a structure around, hey, we're going to do arts and craft. We're going to have music. We're going to have a special guest come in and do something. We're going to have coffee. We're going to have movie night in the summers outside. I think that is a value. So if your loved one really enjoys that structure and not having to think about it, it's almost there, their residence, and they could come in and out, right? Like at the end of the day, they're not very far from where their private room is. So there's something to be said for that versus a boarding room may not have that. It's just a private residence on that. So you have to think about that. A loved one is always on the go, has always been on the go, is extroverted as an example. But home care does not have that structure. If there is a community already in place, they just need some hours to keep them independent in the home. Home care is perfect for that. And they have friends and families, or they enjoy going to the senior center close by. I think they have a network. My mom loves going dancing at the local park, which is a 10-minute walk for her every day. And she has a community of elderly folks that do that dancing every morning for an hour. I think that's great. And so I think that's probably better than assisted living for her at this current time. It is. Again, depends on level of care. She's fairly independent. Safety is also another concern, very common in a facility. They have the legal requirements. And so there are ramps, there are caregivers when they're bathing. So it's all set up. I think in the home, a lot of homes, you have to take a look at that. And that's what we do a lot is safety assessments, whether it's loose rugs or where are the grab bars. If you need a ramp in the home, how are the stairs looking? What's the condition of the flooring? Is there a lot of clutter? I mean, things of that nature, you have to consider that. Are they stepping over a tub? Because, the home is not a shower. Do you need to convert that? Because that's an easy place to fall. So those are things to consider. In boarding homes, usually they also have the safety down again because they're licensed and they have the resources to make an environment safe. That is something to consider. I also will consider in terms of family support. If your loved one entity, you're cross country, 3,000 miles away, and my mom or dad live alone and they're cross country, they're in California, I'm in the East Coast. Think about yourself. I want peace of mind. If something was to happen, how am I going to get the care for my loved one? Because I'm across country, it can take me a whole day or two to get across. Or do you have a close family or friend who could help out if necessary? That is also a consideration. If it's an assisted living or boarding home, there's more peace of mind in terms of there's always staff around. Even if someone was to call out or not be able to show, there's a team around that. So there's that to consider, right? So think about that. I also would think about if you are considering being the primary caregiver for a loved one, which I think is what most people do, which I encourage family caregivers. Think about long term, what's the emotional toll and support? I mean, let's just be honest, it's very hard. In 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, even take care of loved ones or someone with progressive dementia. I took care of my late mother-in-law the last 2.5 years of her life. Even though I was not the primary caregiver, I was with my wife and we both shared duties. We had our moments of stress and crying or mom calling in the middle of the night saying, I need this. I need this now. This is important for me. So drop everything and please come help me. And you do it, of course, right? You want to do it. But after, and I only did a short term, right? I can only imagine families that have been helping loved ones through 10 years and watching the decline, just how hard it is. You have to consider that as well for yourself, for your own well-being is what I would say, and have that conversation with your loved one. Think about also future needs and conditions. Talk to the medical or care team that your loved one has of how do we make whatever condition or chronic conditions your loved one's going through, how do we support their quality of life? How's it going to progress? Because that is something also to consider. A lot of times I will work with clients who want to stay in the home. So we do start with home care and then they're with us for several months or even several years. And then they transition because their level of care becomes too high or the cost of home care with the level of care needs. Again, things change and that's fluid. And I think I always encourage that, particularly if the personal preference of the loved one is, I want to stay in the home. You have to make that assessment with your loved one. Then as a family, obviously it's a family decision, particularly if the loved one is 100% cognitively is capable and competent of making that decision as much as possible. Again, honoring all these other factors that I've gone through today in making that decision. And so I think a lot of it goes to personal preference, assuming all those other factors, particularly costs and things of that, have been in consideration. And then the last thing I talked about, I talked about quality of life. You have to have honest discussions around quality of life. We're all going to pass someday, but I think it's about what the last few months, years that you want the quality of life to be for your loved one. I'm not going to say it trumps everything because again, costs and things of that nature and support all come into play. But at the end of the day, this is your loved one. And so you have to consider and hear them out around, well, what do you want your quality of life to be? If we can afford it, assuming we can afford it and we can do all these things, give you these options. And every option, nothing is perfect, right? There's, as I outlined, there's pros and cons, and it depends on where your family needs are. And that can be fluid, can change. As an example, we have clients that only need 8 hours of care a week, and that keeps them independent and in the home. And this is what they want, and they can afford it. And their quality of life is great versus, okay, I'm going to go directly to independent community. We didn't talk about that, but independent community or assisted living immediately. Think about that. I would say there's also a moment of the mental mindset of your loved one that affects them. I have seen, and it's a family decision. I have seen people put the loved one in a facility, which the loved one didn't want to go to. And then there was immediate decline just because of their mindset. It was, well, I didn't really want to go here if I knew we could stay in the home just with a little extra help. as an example. Mindset is a lot. So that, I think all these things I would consider, again, cost, level of care, lifestyle, the independence that your loved one wants, safety, social interactions, activities, locally, what is the support you have for this loved one, whether it's family or friends or neighbors, future health conditions. Those are all considerations. And then as I close with, which is quality of life, personal preference. So have that conversation with your loved one. And it's important to have that and be honest with that and know that you're not going to get it perfect. There is no perfect decision on here, but you do your best and you lay out all the cards for your loved one is what I would say. Have that honest discussion. All right. Take care.